I met Paul and said, do you want to join my band, And then George joined. And then Ringo joined. We were just a band who made it very, very big, that's all.
Hello, my name is Scott, and welcome to Digger Podcast. In this show, I take an in-depth look behind each and every song of the greatest band that is, was, and ever will be, the Beatles. In this season, Season 3, I will explore the Beatles' third album released in the US, entitled The Beatles Second Album. Although this is the Beatles' third album, this is the second album released on the Capitol Records label, hence the name. Capitol Records issued the Beatles' second album on the 10th of April 1964, and it topped the US charts on the 2nd of May 1964 on its second week of release, replacing Meet the Beatles. This is the first time an artist replaced itself at the number one spot in America. Let's start Season 3 off with the first track off the album,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Roll Over Beethoven. When the Beatles entered EMI Studio 2 on February 11th of 1963 to record their first album, they were understandably awestruck. They had recently scored their first number one British hit, Please Please Me, and now they were ushered into the studio to record the prerequisite album to accompany their hit single. Producers George Martin and manager Brian Epstein were instrumental in deciding which songs were to be recorded on this album, and the Beatles were only happy to oblige. The result was not a true representation of what the Beatles were known for on stage, nor what they were really wanted to perform, but they were more than happy to record a set of songs that showed off their versatility. Hence the inclusion of ballads and mid-tempo pop songs such as Baby It's You, Anna, Chains, and A Taste of Honey. As good as he performed on this day, they acquiesced in including these songs because of the newness of the whole experience. Just 5 short months later, on July 18th, 1963, the Beatles once again entered EMI Studio 2 to start recording their second album. Things couldn't have been more different. Their first album was enjoying its 6th week at the number one spot on the British charts, with an incredible 24 more weeks to go at the top of the charts. They had recently spent 7 weeks at number one with their follow-up single From Me to You, and were looking forward to the release of their next single, the recently recorded She Loves You. They ended up topping the bill on all 3 of the national tours, even usurping Roy Orbison's top position on their May-June nationwide package tour. Beatlemania, as it was soon to be called, was in full swing. Understandably, their confidence level was at an all-time high. What songs would they choose to record on their second album? They didn't need to improve themselves to anyone anymore. They wanted to do what they did best, rock and roll. They exercised much more say in what they were going to record, and so, when choosing cover songs for their second album, they naturally chose to focus mostly on high-energy concert favourites. They could also take a little more time to perfect the songs in the studio, since they had definitely proven themselves beyond one-hit wonder status. Therefore, their first 2 recording sessions on the second British album focused primarily on cover material. The second recording session, on July 30th, 1963, premiered a rockin' little record that had also performed on stage during the last 7 years. It was the first of the 2 numbers immortalized by the Beatles from the catalogue of the most influential songwriter-performer of the 50s, Roll Over Beethoven by Chuck Berry. Songwriting history. If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry. This quote from John Lennon summarizes the phenomenal influence Chuck Berry had on the Beatles as well as in musical history. Chuck Berry was born Charles Edward Anderson Berry in St. Louis, Missouri on October 18th, 1926. The third of 6 children, Chuck had a love for many styles of music early in life, but especially acquired an interest in blues music, which he played since his teenage years. He was deeply influenced by blues legend T-Bone Walker, whom he copied his guitar riffs and stage style from. In 1953, Berry played with the Johnny Johnson Trio, a popular club band from East St. Louis, Illinois. Johnson continued with Berry throughout most of his successful career as pianist and songwriting partner. Chuck liked to incorporate his love for country music into the performances with this group, which ended up attracting a following even among the largely black audiences. This combination of country and blues music began the formation of a rock and roll sound, which is a similar evolution to what Elvis presented in combining his country roots with black music at approximately the same time. This achievement defines Chuck Berry as one of the pioneers of rock and roll music. As stated on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame website, while no individual can be said to have invented rock and roll, Chuck Berry comes the closest to any single figure to being the one who put all the essential pieces together. In 1955, Berry meets blues legend Muddy Waters in Chicago, Illinois, who suggests he get in touch with Leonard Chess of Chess Records, who immediately signed Berry to a record contract that year. His first release was based on the country classic Ida Red, which Berry rechristened as Maybellina, and became his first smash hit. It sold over 1 million copies and reached number 1 on the Billboard Rhythm and Blues charts, as well as crossing over to the pop chart, reaching number 5. Because rock and roll wasn't in its infancy stages at this time, and because Berry was a black artist, his primary placements were on the Rhythm and Blues charts, and remained this way throughout his chart career of the 50s and 60s. After 3 more top 10 placements on the Rhythm and Blues charts, he once again broke into the pop charts with his classic Roll Over Beethoven in 1956, reaching number 29. His inspiration for the song came from his sister Lucy, always wanting to monopolize the family piano to play classical music while he wanted to play popular music. Berry continued his successful chart career throughout the rest of the 50s with rock and roll classics like School Day, Rock and Roll Music, and the legendary Johnny B. Good. This ended suddenly with a conviction and 5-year jail term for hiring a 14-year-old hack chick girl in his St. Louis nightclub. After she was fired from the club, she was charged for prostitution, which caused Berry to be arrested under the Mann Act. His career had a resurgence after his release from prison, first because of his songs being covered by the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and then with a small string of hits in the early 60s, including No Particular Place to Go and You Never Can Tell. After a small comeback in the 70s with his live novelty tune, My Ding Ling, which was his only number 1 hit, Berry's recording career slowly ground to a halt. In the 70s, he continued performing live for the oldies shows with various backing bands, actually travelling from town to town with his guitar, feeling that wherever he would go, he'd find a group to back him. This led to an impromptu jam session with John Lennon on the Mick Douglas Show in 1972, playing Johnny B. Good and Memphis, Tennessee. Getting paid in cash under the table for his live shows, he eventually pleaded guilty to tax evasion and was sentenced to 4 months in prison and 1,000 hours of community service, which he performed through benefit concerts. More legal trouble came Berry's way in 1990, when some woman sued him for allegedly installing cameras in the women's restroom of 2 of St. Louis' restaurants. The class action settlement resulted to the benefit of 59 women in this case, which cost Berry an estimated $1.2 million, not including legal fees. In November of 2000, Berry's former pianist, Johnny Johnson, filed a lawsuit against him, alleging that he co-wrote over 50 songs with Berry, including Roll Over Beethoven. The suit was thrown out of court because too much time had gone by since the writing of these songs. Although uncredited, the truth of the matter may be that the song is in actuality a Berry-Johnson collaboration. Chuck Berry currently performs locally in St. Louis area as well as periodically touring abroad. His 2008 European tour took him to Sweden, Finland, England, Ireland, Switzerland and Spain. Although he is not permanently retired from recording, his concert performances continue to include the classic Roll Over Beethoven, which was listed number 97 in the Rolling Stones magazine 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. Recording history. The second recording session for their second British album with the Beatles occurred on July 30th, 1963. They are in for a long haul that day, there being a morning session as well as an evening session, the latter running from 5 to 11 p.m. It was in the middle of this evening session that the Beatles began and finished Roll Over Beethoven, one of 3 vocal contributions from George Harrison on their second British album. At approximately 7 p.m, after doing more work on Money, That's What I Want, and totally remaking Till There Was You, the Beatles started work on Roll Over Beethoven. It took 5 takes of the full group, vocals and all, to perfect the song, take 5 being considered the best. They then did 2 takes of overdubbing onto take 5, which accomplished double tracking George's lead vocals and adding hand claps throughout the song. These overdubs took the song to take 7. To complete the song, one edit piece was performed of the final guitar riff, which needed to be edited onto take 7 at a later date. This edit piece was considered take 8. By approximately 8 p.m, the Beatles had finished recording the song. August 21st was the date chosen to attach the guitar riff of take 8 to the completed take 7. After this was performed by George Martin and engineers Norman Smith and Jeff Emmerich in EMI's Studio 3, they then created a mono mix for the song, as well as 7 other songs that had been completed so far for the new album. This is the mono mix heard on the British album, but not on the American release. On October 29th, 1963, the same EMI staff, with the mysterious engineer known only with the initials BT, reconvened in EMI's Studio 3 to mix the entire new Beatles album for stereo. This is a stereo version of the song heard on the American Beatles Second Album, although Capitol engineers decided to add the extra reverb onto the recording to create a more punchy sound. Instead of using the mono mix made on August 21st, Capitol created their own mono mix by combining both channels of the stereo mix into one frequency, which was standard practice at the time. The superior quality of the mono mix of the British release was not heard in the US until February 26, 1987, with the release of With the Beatles on CD. The Beatles entered the recording studio once more with Roll Over Beethoven on April 19, 1964. This was in order to record the soundtrack to the British television show Around the Beatles, which was broadcast on May 6th and June 8th on British television. The audio recordings was done between 10 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. at London's IBC Studios on 3-track tape with Jack Good as producer and Terry Johnson and future Beatles producer Glyn Johns engineering. The song was also recorded on this day in a highly abbreviated version, eliminating the third verse as well as both verses after the solo, this being done in order to fit the performances into the television program. August 23rd, 1964 was the first date the Beatles played the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles, California. They included Roll Over Beethoven in the setlist this night, which was recorded for future inclusion on the album The Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl in 1977. Sometime between December 1st and 17th, 1991, George Harrison and his band, including Eric Clapton, recorded a song live during their tour in Japan, the result being released on the album Live in Japan on July 14th, 1992. Then, on June 23rd, 1994, Roll Over Beethoven had been rumoured to be included among one of the variety of songs that Paul, George and Ringo had recorded and filmed at George's Frere Park home studio in Henley-on-Thames, England, for possible inclusion in the anthology television special. This footage was not included in the program, and the audio has not been commercially released as of yet. Thanks for listening to Dig a Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. This has been a Team Wilco production. Until next time, if you know what I mean. Do I do? No? Okay.